everyone.
Leon, what's the name? Bas?
I am the Shama of Luna. Having Aliyah and draw down brachot and shiur on all of us. But yeah, you can. Okay? Yeah, so draw down the shiur for all of us. Also, today is also the yard site of my great grandfather. There's Mesha Yitzchak.
Nice special. Nice, so much great.
So we have about it. Very big mashpia. So he liked to party. He really liked to party. He had a problem. The problem was that he was a shoshet. That was his job. He was a shoshet in Neville. He was a shoshet in Neville, and he said he always has a big dilemma because he said if a shoshet is not allowed to chef when he's drunk. So he says if a shoshet doesn't say l'chaim, then the cow is today. Sorry, if the shoshet says l'chaim, the cow is going to be today. But if the shoshet doesn't say l'chaim, then the shoshet is today. So what do you do? So he said that he worked only 5 days a week. He worked Sunday through Thursday, and then the whole Thursday night he was praying, and Friday he wouldn't work, so he wouldn't have a problem. He didn't have a problem chefing while he was drunk. That was his attitude. He was known for when he would drink, the whole world like didn't exist. He would make somersaults in the street after Farbrengens. He would look for the biggest pile of mud to roll through. And his mother once saw him, and she got very upset. What are you ruining your new suit or something? And he told him that "Pagrab in their belt, you have to bury the world." That was his attitude. To bury all things physical, all the physical things. When Mendel Futterfass says how the Bachram in the yeshiva, when they have to go to the yeshiva in Neville or Shefin, I don't remember where it was. Roughly, so we sneak off the Farbrengens, the Dalmatian Farbrengens, and the yeshiva was run at that time by Mr. Nemenov. He was a very strict mashgiach. He didn't let anybody leave. And when he heard that the Dalmatian was making a big Farbrengen, he warned all the Bachram Chas v'Shalom, no one's allowed to go to the Farbrengen. No one's allowed to be by the Farbrengen. The Bachram are very nervous. What are they going to do if this is not going to let them leave? And then the Farbrengen started, and they're like trying to figure out how to sneak by Rav Nissen, but they notice Rav Nissen's gone. So he goes, Rav Nissen went to the Farbrengen. All the Bachram went to the Farbrengen. Usually, Zalmesha was a very refined and able person. He spoke very gently. So when he would take l'chaim, he would turn into a completely different person. He would give you a piece of his mind. He would talk with very descriptive language, and people asked him, yes. And people asked him, you're such an able person. Why are you speaking like this? Pasnish, it doesn't fit for a big chassid to talk like this. And he said, listen, when I talk to other chassidim, I have to talk very nicely. Yeah. When I talk to a behemoth, when you talk to an animal, you have to talk in the animal's language. I'm talking to my behemoth now. Yes. Yeah, you can go get. Yeah, so what are you saying? So when I'm talking to the behemoth, I have to talk the language that the behemoth understands. Mendel Futterfass says that he once brought 2 Litvish yeshiva bachrim to Neville to bring them close to Chassidus. And he, of course, to bring them to Dalmatian Farbrengen. He was a little nervous that they would be negatively affected by the language that's spoken. So when he came, he whispered to Dalmatian, tone it down a little bit. And Dalmatian said, tone it down a little bit, and he Farbrengen properly. And he used some very choice words. And the Mendel Futterfass was a little bit nervous because the Bachram were there Thursday night all the way through Shabbos, and he was worried it might have a negative influence on them. So after Shabbos, he asked the Bachram, what do you think? And he said, Mamish, we were so impressed. It was so beautiful. I went in, it was Al Moshe, Mamish, an amazing fellow. 12 hours of Shabbos, he learns Hasidus. That's what he used to do. 12 hours every Shabbos, he used to learn Hasidus. So Randall Footer was a little curious what he thought about his language. So he said, well, what do you think about the words that he used during the Farbrengen? So the Racham said, well, we didn't. They said we didn't really understand. We heard him using these Kabbalistic phrases that we weren't familiar with, but we figured he's a holy guy. He must know these words that we're not familiar with. That's what they heard. When he later, in the end of his life, when he moved to Eretz Yisrael, he was a faithful in Tel Aviv. So the Hasidim in Tel Aviv at the time were not used to the Russian mashpiyim, and especially not for someone like Zalman Moshe. So they wrote a letter complaining to the Tzedek as this guy comes in and he starts bringing and he talks like a behemoth, right? So he's screaming at everybody, using these phrases. And the Tzedek wrote a letter back. So we have the letter; it's printed. The Tzedek wrote that every word that a person says, of course, words have a meaning, but the meaning of a word depends largely on the tone with which it is said. I can say the same sentence, and I can say it in a different tone. There's a famous story, the famous story of Ibn Ezra. I don't know if we're going to get into that. Maybe if we have time later, where he writes about the Taimei Mikra, about the tune with which we read the Torah. And he wrote that I can take one sentence, and if I say it in one tone, it'll be a nice sentence. Another tone, it'll be a question. Another tone, it'll be a very derogatory sentence. It really depends on the tone with which you say it. The Rebbe says, when Zalman Moshe says that, even when he uses the choicest words, he's saying it in a loving way. So just an interesting story that it brings out over here. When if I can find it. Okay. So when was this? In 1946, when many people were traveled to the city of Lemberg, a lot of people were trying to leave Russia after the war, and there was an opportunity then for a lot of refugees that came in.
Today, Lvov, right?
What?
Lvov.
Yeah, Lvov. That's right. Yeah, Lvov. Today's
World War II, right?
What? Yeah, right. Yeah, right after World War II, a lot of Polish people who ran to Russia were leaving. So lots of people came there to Lvov, to Lemberg, and they were able to get false Polish passports, and they were able to leave. And there were different groups. So each group of Hasidim had their own smuggling network where they would smuggle people out of Russia. And this guy shows up. He didn't really look like a Chabad Chassid, but he came to the Lubavitch group. He said, "I want to be smuggled out with the group of Lubavitcher Hasidim." And he said, "What's your connection to Chabad?" He says, "I'm a student of Zalman Moshe." Zalman Moshe, okay? How do you know of Zalman Moshe? So he said to them that during World War I, there was tremendous poverty in Russia and Ukraine, and he said he was wandering around from town to town with no food.
The Germans were there. Russia.
Yeah, and it was very difficult for everybody, right? And he said that he where was it? Yes, no, sorry, that was not World War I. It was actually shortly before World War II. Actually, I mixed up the dates. Shortly before World War II, in the 30s. I don't know what's going on. What was happening then? I guess one of the communist crackdowns on property or whatever it was. So there was a big shortage of food in I guess it happened every 10 years, I think, in those days. No, just the Russia had a 10-year plan and a 5-year plan how to improve the economy under communism. So it was very hard to find food. So he said he was wandering around. What?
5 years.
A 5-year.
5-year plan.
5-year plan.
Every 5 years.
So every 5 years, another plan how to improve the economy.
5 years.
Yeah, equal share for everyone. Everyone gets the same. Everyone gets the same suffering.
Everyone gets the same hunger and the same nothing. You get nothing. Everybody gets nothing.
Everyone gets to share the same suffering.
So he said I was wandering around. I had no food, and I was going from city to city trying to get a meal.
Bye bye.
Time.
Bye bye.
So So he said he ended up in Neville, and everybody told him, you go to Rav Zalman Moshe. He doesn't have anything for himself, but whatever he has, he gives away. He's the last drop of food in his house. For people. His wife had actually hide whatever they had money, she had to hide it from him. He shouldn't give it away. So he said, I came, I was looking for Rav Zalman Moshe. He told me he's probably in shul. It was the middle of the day, but I
Wife's
came.
not so happy about that.
So I heard he's in shul in the middle of the day, but I come in, he's still davening, his shul is empty, he's sitting here davening, so I waited till he finished, and he came over to me, he asked me how, where I'm from, how am I doing? I told him I'm very hungry. Do you have anything for me to eat? And he said, listen, I don't have a lot in my house, but I have some mei challah, some sort of cheese, meigvina, some sort of cheese byproduct, like the water that's left over after the cheese making process, like whey. And he said, that's all I have, but I'm willing to share it with you. I said, wonderful, great. So he said, but I have two conditions. Two conditions? What are the two conditions? He said, the first condition is that when you take whey, when you have a container of whey, so on the top it's very watery, and the bottom is like more thick and creamy. So he said, I'm going to split it up. I'm going to take the bottom in one bowl, the top in the other bowl, and I'm going to take the bottom, the thick bottom part, and you're going to take the watery part. Okay, fine. If that's the condition, it's your way. You can choose how you want to divide it.
Bottom is more calories, more nutrients.
Yes.
So he says that. I said, okay, fine. That's the condition. That's the condition. He said, but then there's a second condition. Second condition is that before we eat, I want you to look at me. I want you to say the following. I want you to say, he says this in Yiddish, I'll translate it. He says, first we'll say it in Yiddish, no one translates it. He says, Du alte Pferd, dir nimmst du die Gedichte und mir gibst du die Schittere. You old horse, why are you taking the thick for yourself and giving me the watery stuff? You have to say that. Figure this guy's joking, he's not very serious. He goes home with them. He comes to the house completely empty. There's this little container of whey, and he takes out two bowls and he pours up the watery stuff into one bowl and the thick cream into the other. And he says, I was hungry, I was ready to eat, but he says, no eating yet. We had a deal. So he says, I look at him. It's like hard for me I'm not call an old horse. He just gave me half of his food, and he's waiting. He's like, no. I said, okay, you old horse, what are you taking the thick stuff for yourself and giving me the watery stuff? He says, you're right. Switch bowls, and then then we started eating. That's the type of person that he was. Chaim is shamash b'koil yeshuis for all of us.
So fine. Why did you say that? Why didn't you just give him the ball? Why the rabbi wanted to be insulted or something?
Yes, he wanted. We actually discussed this last week.
Why do you want to be insulted?
Because first of all, he wanted his Yates. He felt at the time. This is my explanation. It's not written in the story. My explanation is that when he came into his house, he knew that he should give him the juicy, thick, creamy part, but he didn't feel like he wanted to, right? And he felt that he wasn't going to do. He wasn't a dishonest person. Right? He wasn't going to do something that he didn't feel like he's comfortable doing. So he said, I want to get Musar. I want somebody to scream at me until I do what's the right thing.
Why do you have to be Calvin old horse? Just say, can I please have? Do you think it would be fair?
So we mentioned before, that's the way he spoke. You old horse, that's the way he farbrang. That was his, he said when he talked to a behemoth, when he talked to an animal, you have to talk in the language of the animal.
Yeah, but why is he calling himself an animal? Why is he degrading himself?
He has an animal inside him. We all have an animal. That's right. So that's why he used to farbrang like this.
So why just him that he only has the animal?
No. Everybody has an animal. That's what we started off saying. That's how we used to farbrang.
He's just joking. They're both very deep people. So yeah, he's just joking.
Well, he was a very holy tzaddik or something.
He was a big chassid.
Well,
The Rebbe, when he was in Paris, said one of the farbrangans that chassidim, when the chassidish homes were saying over sayings from the Rebbe the whole time, phrases from the Rebbe, right? What do they say in the Rebbe's home? So they say sayings from other Rebbeim and from some chassidim. He said, Rav Zalman Moshe is a word, Dr. Nivra Beis Harav. That's what he said. That he is one of the chassidim we say over his teachings in the Beis Harav. So the Rebbe said.
Wow.
So let's go to a little bit about Parsha. We don't have that much time, but so the Gemara tells us the story of Shimon ben Shattach, who once went out and bought a donkey, and they bought a donkey, and he brings it home, and his students start getting the donkey ready, cleaning it up, and they're cleaning up the donkey, and they find in the saddle of the donkey, it's like a little pouch inside, and they find a precious gem inside the pouch of the donkey. Oh, just like that, exactly.
Inside the what of the donkey?
Inside the saddle of the donkey, there's like a little pouch inside the saddle, or whatever. So they run to Shimon and Shatach and they say, Rebbe, you struck it big. Hashem finally rewarded you for all of your mitzvahs. Now you don't have to worry about money for the rest of your life. You can sell this to live comfortably. So, what do you mean? It's not mine. Give it back to the Arab that sold it to me. He said, really? You're going to give it back to the Arab? I said, yeah, it's not mine. I have to return it. Doesn't make a difference. A yid, a goy. First of all, it's a big kiddush Hashem. And the Gemara says he went back, he returned to this Arab, and the Arab got up and he said, wow, how great is the God of the Jewish people. His mom is such honest people. And this is something that we find, there are many stories similar to this, where we have mitzvahs, of course, to be honest between ourselves, but it doesn't just extend to other Jews, it extends to everybody. We have to be honest. And if something doesn't belong to us, we have to give it back. But in this week's parsha, we find something very interesting. Hashem says to Moshe to speak to the Jewish people. And he said, I want you to go to the Egyptians and I want you to borrow from them gold and silver and precious garments. And we don't find anywhere that he gave it back. Right? The Gemara has a famous story about Alexander the Great, that he established the International Court of Justice. Right? Today we think it's a new thing, International Court of Justice. But Alexander the Great also established an International Court of Justice. And of course, just like in today's Court of Justice, half of their claims are against Israel, right? That's the way it works.
Not just half, most of the claims.
Most of the claims are against Israel. So the Gemara tells us that in Alexander's court, the same thing happened. One of the first claims was the Egyptians. They came in front of Alexander and he says, the Jews owe us money. What do they owe you money? Well, they borrowed all this gold and silver from us and then they never gave it back.
Well, from thousands of years ago, right?
Thousands of years
Oh
ago,
my
so
God.
we have to pay interest on it. We have to triple and quadruple exponential growth of the interest rate. We don't know what
Seriously holding on to the Mitzvah as a.
Yeah, it's a story in the Gemara.
It's a story in the Gemara. They came to court. They said
We didn't borrow them, we took it.
We said
The Torah says so. The Jewish people said, "What's your proof?" And he said, "Our proof is the title. Look at the title. It says v'yishalu ish me'israel." Every person should borrow from the Egyptians. So they never gave it back. He ran away with our money. So Alexander said to the Jewish people, send somebody to argue your claim, and the Jewish people were very nervous. If they send, they might lose. Of course, not to accept them. And it was this rabbi, he was a hunchback, and he said, "Let me go." And he said, "Nobody even knows who you are." And he says, "That's better that way. If I lose, it won't be a big deal, and if I win, you'll say it's the Kayach HaTorah." They sent him. And he said, your proof is from the Torah. You're accepting the Torah as a legal document. So let's look at what the Torah says. The Torah says there were 600,000 Jews who worked in Egypt for 400 years. So let's calculate the salary of 600,000 people working for 400 years. I think you're going to find that you owe us a lot of money. The Egyptians said, it's a good argument. We have to think about it. And they ran away. They never came back to court. And they left all their money and got all the money. It was a Shemitah year. There wasn't a lot of food. And then Alexander let them take the grain from the Egyptian, the Egyptians that they left over there. But so that's a very nice answer for Alexander, right? That they owe us money, so we're allowed to steal. Maybe in Alexander's court, that was a valid argument, right? You didn't pay me, so I'm allowed to steal, but that's not a halachic claim, right? Halachically, if somebody steals money from me, I'm not allowed to steal back from them, right? The Gemara has a famous story. What? So why would Hashem say such a thing? So, I mean, there's a famous story with, I don't remember who it is right now. I think it was Rabbah. That Rabbah was once Rabbah had 400 barrels of wine, and they all went sour. They became vinegar, and Rabbah was very, very upset by this. So it's a strange thing. He kept it in proper conditions. It shouldn't have become vinegar, and he was very upset, very bothered by it. The other rabbis heard that Rabbah was disturbed. They came to speak to him, and they said, Rabbah, if this happened, this unusual thing happened to him, and you lost a lot of money, there must be a reason for it. You got to do a cheshbon on nefesh. And Rabbah said, you suspect me of doing something wrong? How dare you suspect me of doing something wrong? So Rabbah said, well, it's better to suspect you than to suspect Hashem of doing something wrong, right? If Hashem turned your wine into vinegar, there's got to be a reason for it. So Rabbi says, I don't know, I didn't do anything. I'm so honest to all my business dealings. If anybody knows of anything I did wrong, please tell me. One of the rabbi says, yeah, we heard you don't pay one of your workers, you didn't pay. You owe him a lot of back pay, you didn't pay him. And he says, who? This guy? He stole so much money from me. He cut the fruits on my field. He was supposed to give me 30%, and then he didn't give me anything. He owes me more money than I owe him. So they said, just because you have a claim against him, you can bring him to court. That doesn't give you a right to withhold his wages, right? And the rabbi said, you're right. And he went ahead, he paid him. And the Gemara brings two versions of what happened. One, according to one version, the vinegar turned back into wine. According to another opinion, it stayed vinegar, but the price of vinegar was shot up. There was a big shortage of vinegar, and the price of vinegar shot up, and it was sold for more expensive than wine. So we see very clearly that just because somebody steals from you, it doesn't give you a right to steal from them. So what is this idea of borrowing money and not paying it back? So we have many commentaries on the Chumash that explain it's not, they don't really borrow it. The word v'yishalu, which usually means to borrow, literally it means to request, right? The word shoyel, which means a borrower, also means someone who makes a request of another person. So really, it doesn't mean that they borrowed it. They really just requested from the Egyptian as wages. And the Torah uses an expression which could be understood as borrowing, but it's not necessarily borrowing. They really didn't borrow it. They really demanded it from the Egyptians. And this is very nice. This is the way the Rashbam learns it. He says that Vayishalu means that they request a gift from the Egyptians, but it still doesn't explain why the Torah chose. What? Yeah. So it doesn't pass. So that's what the Rashbam says. But the question becomes, why did the Torah choose this word? The Torah could have chosen a million words to request. There are so many other words that could mean to ask that don't mean to borrow. So why does the Torah choose this word? So let's see where this is from. Yalkut Shemaini in Rus brings down that there was once a poor and pious man who earned his living working on the land, working in the field. And one day he's working in the field, he's working very hard, he doesn't have a lot of money. And he looks up and he sees in front of him an Arab standing in front of him. And it looks like it's an unusual Arab, so it's a very special Arab. This Arab is a big beard, very respectable looking Arab. And the Arab approaches him and he says, I want you to know that it was decreed in heaven that you should be wealthy, you should be rich for 6 years. I came here to ask you, when would you like those 6 years? Do you want it right now? Do you want to wait a few years? Do you want to save it for the last
Only
6
for
years?
6 years?
6 years, that was the decree in heaven.
And then you become poor afterwards?
And you'll come poor afterwards, yeah. That was
So we shouldn't try to invest any money or anything.
You shouldn't try to invest any money. Everything is going to go. Right? The same way it's going to come, it's going to go. Only 6 years.
He's got to give it away to someone else.
He can do whatever he wants to during the 6 years. Whatever's left in his possession in the 6 years is gone. So he says that's a pretty tough decision. I can't make that decision on my own. I need to go home and discuss it with my wife. So, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. So he goes home and he asks his wife what to think. His wife says, well, we're supposed to be rich for 6 years. Let's do it right away. There's no reason to wait. No reason to put it off. I said, you sure we shouldn't maybe save it for the end of our lives and we can retire and live, No, right now. So he goes back the next day and he says to this Arab, who was obviously the upper, when he says Eliyahu Hanavi, and he says, I want to be wealthy right now. It's just excellent. It's done. I mean, it's done. Go home. He comes home and he hears the kids are running around in front of the house. Daddy, we found it. We're digging in the garden. We found this chest full of gold coins. Amazing. What they pulls it out. He gets a shovel. He
Just like
chest.
that. Just like that.
Right? It came right away. So he brings what?
It wasn't
The
me. I'll put it
Yalkut
that
doesn't say it was Eliyahu Hanavi. That's the assumption. That was Eliyahu Hanavi. Maybe not. Maybe it was some Other, maybe it was a tzaddik, I don't know. But usually when there's an Arab person that comes, it's Eliyahu Hanavi. When an Arab messenger comes from Hashem, it's Eliyahu Hanavi. So he comes home and he says, he tells his wife, he's very excited, and his says, what can we do with the money? What can we buy first? A new house, a new wagon, delicious food. And his wife says, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna buy a notebook, or in those days they had scrolls, and quills and ink. Okay, so he goes out, he buys a big scroll and some ink, and his wife said, we're going to use this scroll, this ledger, we're going to write down what we do with every penny of this money. And we're going to use it very, very wisely. We're only going to use it on things that we need or to help other people. And we're going to keep track of every single penny that we use. That's what they did. They immediately hung up signs. Anybody who needs food is welcome to come to our house. They hosted big meals. Everybody who wanted tzedakah would come to them. They gave away tremendous amount of money to tzedakah. And they themselves lived, they didn't live in a big, beautiful house, but they lived comfortably. And 6 years went by like this. They spent every minute. First of all, they used all the money to help people, and they kept track of every single penny they spent. After 6 years, he's walking the street one day, and right in front of him, he sees the same Arab from 6 years ago, and he says, 6 years are up. I'm here to take the money. And he says, well, you remember when you first gave me the money, I told you I have to discuss it with my wife. So don't take it away. I have to discuss it with my wife. Okay, I'll discuss it with your wife. He goes home, he discusses it with his wife. They come up with a plan. The next day, the Arab comes back and sees him in the street, and he says, I'm here to take the money. And he pulls out from his pocket this big scroll that he had kept over the last 6 years. He says, listen, if the decree was that the money should be taken away, great, okay, that's what the decree is. But before you take the money away, let's go over how this money was used. Okay? And they start going over how the money was used. And he says, listen, you can go back to whoever sent you and wants to take the money away and tell them how we spent the money. And ask them if they have somebody else who could spend the money better than us, then we'll give it away. If not, then you should leave the money. The Arab says, okay, that's a good argument. Goes back, he leaves, he comes back the next day, he says, who decided to leave the money by you? We don't have anybody who will do a better job taking care of the money than you. Right? Well, if we all knew, that's the thing. He knew that was going to be here for 6 years. Most of us who make money, we think it's ours forever, right? But him and his wife knew that they were going to have it for 6 years, so they knew how to treat it, right?
Is this a real story? Is it a real
This is a real story in the Yalkut Shemaini, Rus 607, 607. Yeah, up Reish Vav.
But didn't the Arab guy say that?
So it means Hashem decreed, not Eliyahu, because obviously
right.
not Hashem.
Yes.
So why does that even need to be said? Hashem already knew that this was going to happen. Why did it need to be said that? Oh, I have to make the argument that I'm gonna manage the money better than anyone else. Why should it have to be said? Hashem's already going to do it. Then why do they have to make the argument? Hashem should have just left it.
Hashem wants us to make Hashem wants us to daven. Why do we have to come every morning and say, Hashem, give us parnas? Hashem knows we need parnas, so you should give it to us. Hashem wants us to make that argument. Come to Hashem and say, Hashem, I need parnasa in order to be able to serve you better. I need health to serve you better. Right. And Hashem wanted him to realize that the reason why he's keeping the money is because he actually used it properly. Another story is this is a story with Avram Yeshua Heschel, the Aftarav, known as the Oyev Yisrael. So a man once came to the Aftarav and he told me there's a big problem. He's very, very poor and he has to marry off his daughter and he needs 200 rubles for the wedding. Otherwise,
how much is that money?
It's a lot of money. A lot. It's like 2-3 years salary or something like that for an average person.
Today, $3.
Huh?
What? Today, $3. 200 rubles, $3.
Today 200 rubles is nothing. That's right. But in today's money, it would be, I don't know, $150,000. I don't know what that amount is, the exact amount. But it was a serious amount of money. It was, how much does the wedding cost today? Today, when you want to make a wedding, you have to just pay for the wedding itself. You don't have to get an apartment for the couple. You don't have to support the groom to learn and toil for a few. Some people do. learning koilel for a few years, but that's what he used to do. So he says it's going to cost me 200 rubles, and I don't have So the Rebbe says, how much money do you have? He says, well, I have exactly 0 rubles, so 200 rubles, 200 rubles in the red. So the Apter Rav sits down. He says, I want you to travel to this in the city. He's told, takes out a piece of paper. He writes down a letter for him, and I want you to bring this letter to Avram, the lumber merchant over there, and he's going to give you the 200 rubles. He's a chassid of mine. He's going to give you the 200 rubles. So this man takes the letter. He travels all the way to this distant city that they were sent him to, and he comes to Avram, the lumber merchant, and he says, I'm here. The Rebbe sent me here. Oh, the Rebbe sent you? What? Welcome into my house. No, what does the Rebbe want? And he says, here, I have a letter from you from the Rebbe. So he opens up the letter. He starts reading. His face turns red. The Rebbe writes me a letter to give you $150,000, 200 rubles? Who does the Rebbe think he is? He's my accountant? He's my accountant? He tells me if he can ask me for a donation. It's not, I could probably give 30 rubles, 50 rubles, maybe even 100 rubles. A lot of money. But the Rebbe has an exact amount he needs me to give. He's not my accountant. He says, listen, I'll give you 50 rubles. It's a good amount. 50 rubles is a good amount. You'll cover 25% of your expenses. Maybe you'll make a smaller wedding, something. He says, no, I'm not taking 50 rubles. The Rebbe told me to get 200 rubles. I'll give you 100 rubles. Nope. I'm not taking 1 penny less. The Rebbe told me to take 200 rubles. So he says, get out of my house. The Rebbe doesn't tell me how much money to give to Tzedakah. So he takes the letter, he goes back.
Remember the tzaddik back then? It was like a
Yes.
the Chabad Rebbe or the
This was the Rav Yeshua Heschel of the Apter Rav.
Abdul?
So he travels back to Apter. Comes to the Rebbe, tells the Rebbe what happened. So he says, okay. So the Rebbe says, okay. The Rebbe sits down and writes a new letter. He said, I want you to travel to a different city, to Yitzchak, the whatever it is, the storekeeper, and he'll help you. He'll give you 200 rubles. So he goes to the second city. He comes to Yitzchak's house. Yitzchak doesn't live in such a fancy house of Avram, the lumber merchant. He lives in a simple house, and he's a little nervous. If Avram couldn't afford 200 rubles, he says Yitzchak is going to be able to afford it. And he comes in. He says, Yitzchak, I have a letter from the Rebbe. Yitzchak reads the letter. He says, wow, the Rebbe wants 200 rubles. Says, I don't really have 200 rubles right now. But if you stay with me for a week, I'll put together the money. The next day, early in the morning, Yitzchak's running around, collecting, borrowing, asking, calling in favors. Within a week, he had collected and borrowed the 200 rubles, and he says, "Here, take it." The Rebbe told me to give it to you. So he goes back to the Rebbe. Fine, everything is good. And 2 days later, Avram, the lumber merchant, gets the news that one of his big factories burnt down. Just a few days later, it was a ship that was supposed to be delivering his stuff, sunk at sea. And within a few weeks, he lost all his money. And suddenly, Yitzchak, the storekeeper, hundreds of customers are waiting in line to get into a store. He has to open a bigger store. Pretty soon, he opens a few more branches, and all of his money was transferred to Yitzchak. And of course, Avram, the lumber merchant, is not a fool, and he realizes what happened, and he immediately sets out to Apta. It takes him a long time to get there. He can't really go by wagon. He goes by foot. He doesn't have any money. And he comes to Apta. He comes to the Rebbe's Gabi, and he speaks to the Rebbe. Gabi says, the Rebbe doesn't want to see. The Rebbe says not to let you in. I have to meet the Rebbe. I have to speak to the Rebbe. No, the Rebbe doesn't want to talk to you. Okay, I'm calling the Rebbe to Din Torah. I have a court case against the Rebbe. Court case against the Rebbe. Okay, they notify the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, okay, we'll set up a court. They bring up three big tzaddikim, 3 big rabbis for the court case, and he comes to they come to court. And Avram, the lumber merchant, says this is not right. The Torah says that a person has to give 10% of his possessions to tzedakah, 10% of his money to tzedakah. If you really want to go out of your way and be generous, you can give 20%. And let me tell you, I have my books here. I gave 20% of all my money to tzedakah. It doesn't say that if the Rebbe tells you to give 200 rubles, you have to give 200 rubles. Nowhere in halacha does it say such a thing. And one day the Rebbe sends me this letter telling me how to give money, and I told him I'm going to give 50 rubles, 100. I was willing to give 100 rubles. You know how much money 100 rubles is? I was willing to give 100 rubles. And then the Rebbe goes and takes away all my money. That's not right. What right does the Rebbe have to take away my money? The judge is saying, that's a good argument. Rebbe, what do you have to say? So Dr. Rav says, let me tell you the beginning of the story. Many, many years ago, before my soul came down into the world, my soul came before the heavenly court, and they told my neshama that we have a big job for you. You have to go down into the world. You have to be a rabbi, you have to have many chassidim, and you have to accomplish a tremendous amount of things in your life. And in order to do it, you're going to need a lot of supplies and a lot of energy and a lot of precious. And they told me exactly what I'm going to need to carry out my mission. And in order to carry out everything I need to accomplish, I would need a tremendous amount of money. And they told me that before I came down. And I said, I don't want to manage money. I don't have time for that. So they told me, okay, you don't have to manage it. We're going to take this money. We're going to distribute it amongst the chassidim, amongst your chassidim. And whenever you need money, you'll get it from them. And he says, okay, great. So I chose a few of my chassidim, and I gave some of my money to this chassid, some of my money I gave to that chassid. And Avram the lumber merchant was one of my choices. And every penny that Avram the lumber merchant had was really my money. And his job was to help me in my mission. So therefore, when this Jew came and he needed 200 rubles, I sent him to Avram the lumber merchant. And Avram the lumber merchant used to do his job. Okay, fine. I'll take my money back. What?
Avram the lumber merchant, he was aware? He was aware
No,
of this?
he was not aware of this. The tzaddik was aware. Avram the lumber merchant was not aware. Right? So he doesn't want to carry out his mission. Okay, fine, I'll transfer the money. If I go to the bank and if the bank doesn't do a good job with my money, I'll transfer money to a different bank. So I transfer my money to Yitzchak. It was never Avram's money in the first place. The judges, they hear and they say, it's a very good argument. The Rebbe is right. Halachically, the Rebbe is right. It was his money. He can take it and take it back whenever he wants. But Avram, the lumber merchant, is one of your chassidim, and he himself needs to live. So you have to make sure that even if you take all the money away from him, he always has to have enough money to support his family. And Dr. Rav agreed, and from then on, Avram was never rich again, but he always had enough money to support his family. And this is what's going on in the parsha. The Jewish people are slaves. For the last 210 years, they were slaves. They didn't have a penny to their name. They were working all day in the fields, working very hard. And suddenly, something amazing is going to happen. The Jewish people were about to become extremely wealthy. They were about to become millionaires, billionaires, overnight. The Gemara says that every single Jew who left Egypt left with at least 90 camels or 90 camels or donkeys, carry as donkeys. 90 donkeys loaded with silver and gold. How much is 90 donkeys with silver and gold? A few $1 million, at least, probably hundreds of millions of dollars. Every single Jew was about to become a billionaire. And Hashem was very worried. Are they going to know how to handle their money properly? And the Jewish people were very worried. They said, Hashem, we don't know, are you giving us money? We said we want money. Maybe we're going to take some of the money and use it to build a golden calf in another 40 days. Who said we're going to know how to handle this money? So Hashem said, that's a very good point. And Moshe says to Moshe, this is a very big problem. What should we do? I have a solution, he says. The Jewish people, from the moment they get the money, they have to realize that this is borrowed money. This is not their money. This is money that Hashem gave them for 6 years or for whatever their lifespan is, for 120 years. They get this money to do a certain mission with it. And that's the way they have to get the money, knowing that it's borrowed money. And the entire time that it's in their possession, they have to realize that this is borrowed money. We're like this guy who got the money for 6 years. He knew it was borrowed money. And therefore, he made sure to spend every penny properly. And this is why Hashem comes to the Jewish people and he uses an expression of borrowing. It wasn't that they should trick the Egyptians. The Egyptians, they came and they told honestly, like the Rashbam says, we need the money. But Hashem says to the Jewish people, I want you to look at it as borrowed money. And if we look at our money as borrowed money, Hashem says, I know you'll make the right choices with that money. So all of us in our own lives, we have to look at everything we have. We have to realize that all the money that we own is all borrowed money. And we should also keep a ledger, keep a document, and keep track how we spend this borrowed money. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Borrowed money.
Next week, Wednesday.
Borrowed Hashem.
Oh, yeah, it's that. Yeah, next. Oh, you
Next
can
week
come
is Shabbat, so.
for brand with us.
Okay.
Yeah.